how do you build a distributed culture where these people who may not be employees feel part of the company? And the number one reason people leave companies is because they hate their boss, right? I mean, that's really the number one thing. Maybe they hate their team, right? But now that they're distributed, what's that relationship with your team leader? How do you find meaning at work beyond the work itself, right? How do you connect to the mission of the company, right? How do you move between being an employee and being a contractor, between being on-site and being off-site? There's magic that happens when you put humans in the room together, right? How do you replicate that or create that? And I think in many ways, the laws, the employment laws, are still built on the idea that you have employers and contractors. But that's not the case. We have a whole spectrum of relationships now between of engagement between a company and an employee, and the employment laws will have to also catch up here, because many of the ways people operate with contractors is actually driven by the employment law, not by what's efficient for the product.
That's fascinating. In a way, when you talk about the threat, comparing that to the companies that failed to embrace the cloud when they should have and stayed behind, I almost can see some of the companies out there that are jumping at the opportunity to go back to normal, bring everybody to the office, hiring only in one city, in one place. You can already tell that those companies, they are going to have such bottleneck scaling that you can already tell they are likely to fail. Versus the companies that from the beginning some struggle with the challenges of remote, distributed, figuring out how to scale culture, figuring out how to bring the different types of people and employment structures across that spectrum that you mentioned to make a culture that is resilient and that is actually infrastructure for the modern company.
So I like to use the example of Facebook and mobile, right? When mobile started, Facebook had this mindset of HTML5 is going to solve everything.
Right.
And the reason they had that mindset was because they didn't own the operating system. And so they didn't want to get caught into it. And so HTML5, they wanted to look at it as a browser, right? And they built HTML5 product, which was terrible. Everyone agreed. But the value is so high with Facebook that people used it in spite of it being terrible. And that allowed them to continue, on and on and on. And because people were still using it. There was a crisis point, and it's not, loosely connected to the drop in the stock price, other things, but there was a point where they realized that they couldn't compete if they stayed in HTML5, and they had to move to be a native mobile application, and they did a phenomenal job in execution. Right, it's taking a battleship and turning it on a dime, which they did in their favor. And I don't say a lot of positive things about Facebook, but that was like amazing, the change that they did and drove that. But that was their understanding that they're going to be left behind with staying in HTML5, and that their strategy was wrong. Same thing here. Companies that are trying to go back to the way the world was exactly, right? I mean, they'll get short-term success because there's value in it, but long-term, they're going to fall apart, right? And because the demands of the employers are going to be different, and they're not going to be able to find the talent that they need to continue that way. It does not mean that there's no value in being in a room together. It does not mean there's no value to being an employee. And to get that whole kind of a culture of work is super important. And I'm a huge believer in the fact that you put people in a room together and you can do magic. But how often do you go in the room? Who are the people in the room? Are they all employees or not? And by the way, another challenge is going to be, how do you pay contractors with stock options? Right? I mean, that's part of what drives the tech space, and you're going to have to do that at a certain point, or kind of in your business, people are going to have a hard time continuing to work as contractors if they're not getting the stock-based compensation that employees get, right? So all these different things have to come together into a new way of doing things.
Agreed. There is a new modality of work that's happening at the same time that companies in a new structure of the modern, maybe cloud-based company. A new modality is happening to empower that whole category to exist, from the employment laws that need to change, as you mentioned, and on the way to compensate. Also based on equity. In fact, at A-Team, we see that today we answer the promise only partially by enabling you to work on problems that matter to you with people you like to work with, earning very well, and having full flexibility. But we don't enable yet the upside of the companies that you work on, or being part of such a network. And that is something that we hope to solve in the subsequent months. But
and by the way, those are the kind of innovations I think you guys are driving. is this kind of thinking, right? And again, employment laws kind of determine this, right? From a company perspective, you don't care that if someone's working, you'd be happy to give them equity if they're going to deliver, right? And it could be that these employees end up having equity in A teams, right? Or an A team becomes an aggregator, getting equity from everyone else, like, and becomes a kind of a VC in that. They're all different models that are coming because everything's getting blurred, right? The most important thing when you're in change, like in these market changes, first of all, that's the only time I think the startups can really make an impact is when there's a big market change. So I think you guys are well positioned for it, right? But it's like just when something changes dramatically, like it's happening now. But the second point is really that clarity and focus that has to be that needs to be driven into understanding the problem in depth and being able to solve it in a way that instead of replicating the old world in the new terms. Right? What a lot of people are doing is saying, okay, we'll let our employees work remotely.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? But that just solves the geographic issue. They're still employees, and they might be working projects they don't like, and they're going to leave you and go to someone else.
And they're just going to leave, yeah, because attrition is increasing since it's very easy. Like your next job is just a tab away, right, on your browser. You don't have the awkwardness of looking for.
Not even a tab away. Your next job is a incoming text message as you speak. Right. Right? It's like there's so much of this. So again, another thing that I always ask people when we're talking about talent is, how dependent are you on your specific leaders? Right? If you're a small company, you probably have one kind of CTO or VP engineering that runs the whole engineering org. That's the number one person being headhunted right now by every other company. What happens if she leaves? Like, what do you do at that point, right? And so actually breaking smaller teams builds resilience for the organization because you've got more leaders in place that have the skills of running a large engineering org or are learning the skills, but do not have the deficiencies of running a huge org. And so you start breaking the company to smaller units, it's much easier to decide which units are on-premise, which are off-premise, and which are outsourced. Right? So this whole issue of squads and guilds, this whole move into keeping teams small and nimble, right, falls into this question also of, are they employers or employees, or are they a contractor?